come to represent by the time the people of God are delivered from the Antichrist, when the thought of Babylon comes to the mind of God, having destroyed his enemies, having pressed them to a place where the Bible says that the blood flows to the bridle of a horse, the grapes of wrath poured out, literally as the Lord returns, smashing them in that valley of Megiddo. Suddenly after this great victory in Armageddon, God remembers Babylon. Had Babylon been that region geographically between the Tigris-Euphrates, that area, Iran, Iraq, had it been that area that God is dealing with as far as Babylon is concerned, it would have probably been portion or part of Armageddon. So when he talks about Babylon, and Babylon still having control, even after he's done squashing the grapes of wrath, and that's to use the analogy utilized there, we see that literally what takes place is God thinks of Babylon, or actually these plagues, these 21 plagues that hit, these seals, the judgments of the seals, the judgments of the trumpets and the vials. And at the end, God remembers Babylon. And again, this all precedes literally the return of Jesus here to squish everybody, but this is what comes to the mind of God. So we read 18th chapter, verse number 9, the kings of the earth that committed fornication lived deliciously with her will bewail her. And it goes on to list, I'm not going to read it all since we want to catch up to a lot of what we were talking about last week, but what happens is she has everything. She possesses everything that everybody wants. And God destroys her. By the time you get to the 19th chapter, Jesus returns, and he's dealing with those enemies of God. But God destroys Babylon. He's got something special in mind for her. So Babylon comes to represent a system. It comes to represent something that literally has encompassed the world, and through treachery and through deception has caused many, what the Bible refers to as committed fornication with her. They slept with her. They literally have been part of what she's doing. And we've come to the conclusion that Babylon isn't a religious group per se like the Catholics, the Muslims. Babylon is a system that literally has captivated the world. So we're going to go on reading out of Thomas Sowell's Inside American Education. Remember, we're still talking about Hitler. I don't want you to forget that. We're kind of jumping back and forth between several of these books. And what we're doing is basically letting us see how this system operates and how this system even captivates the Christian church. We talked at the beginning of this series how on Sunday the stream has a tendency of crossing. And they'll have a tendency of crossing again and again. We're coming to one of those points where what we're learning on Sunday again is crossing with what we're learning on Tuesdays. And that is that on Sundays we're talking about the Maccabees. We're talking about how they had fallen into a pattern of rebuilding a wall, getting it knocked down, rebuilding a wall. And the sum of their existence is based on they're just building the wall. They build it, it gets knocked down. They build it, it gets knocked down. It's a pattern that continually is happening. They're trapped in that system where the only thing they know is what they remember about God, and that is that the glory of the latter temple is going to far exceed the glory of the former, that Jesus is going to don that temple, that city. So there's prophecy or destiny in store for them when they complete this. So that's all they knew. So they just kept on building despite what was going on. What we see here is that the same way that the devil utilizes the devices against the Maccabees and against the church of God, it literally, this system, literally wants to lock the church into a pattern where it seemingly is running on a treadmill just for the entertainment of the world. And the church does nothing. We were talking about how as long as these Maccabeans were sitting in Jerusalem, just running through the treadmill, just building their walls and having them knocked down, and then building the walls just for them to be knocked down, wall being built just for it to be knocked down, they weren't impressing anybody. The world was looking at them, and as long as they were confined to building that wall, who cares? They had no impact on the world. In fact, rather the impact that was taking place in the world was the conquering Hellenism that was spreading because of the Greeks. So the influence in the world was coming more from the conquering powers rather than from God and rather than from his people. And what happens in today's society, the church has become nothing more or no different than these Maccabeans who are just building their own little kingdom. They know prophecy, they understand a word, but there's absolutely no impact being made on society. On the contrary, the plans and the devices of the other system not only is making inroads into our society, but it's making inroads into the church to the extent that the church swallows these philosophies, hook, line, and sinker, to the extent that they even preach this stuff to the church. You go to churches, and what kind of sermons are they preaching? They're preaching sermons on racism. They're preaching sermons on the financial woes that we have as minorities. They're preaching sermons on women's lib. You know, that's all that woman thou art loose crap is. It's nothing more than a hook for women. Tell them how great they are. They ain't got a man. There's no father for their baby, but tell them how great they are anyway. That's wrong. God had never intended for that. But we've got this system where suddenly, you know, it's the church's role to literally be preaching, you know, on the virtues of the family. Why has the church suddenly become a social worker? Huh? Suddenly the church is tossed into this argument over whether or not women should be pastors or priests. Whether homosexuals are Christians too. Why is the church even dealing with this stuff? All you got to do is listen to these guys. Nothing but positive messages. That Robert Schuller stuff. Happy, happy. If you can't preach a happy sermon, don't preach one at all. If it's going to be, it's because of you. Nothing but happy, happy, positive. Suddenly the church's main emphasis is to teach people how to be managers, be millionaires, how to prosper. Nothing to do with what God is saying, but everything to do with what the world is saying. If the world wants you to be successful, they send you to seminars. If the church wants you to be successful, they have seminars. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that the church has become more like the world than the world like the church. Seems to me that the agenda of the Antichrist, that the agenda of the spirit of Antichrist, that the agenda of Babylon has a greater influence on the church than the influence of God in it. Now here's the problem with the church. We've got one book. And it gets boring. We got one book. And oh, we already heard them sermons. We got one book. And it has one message. Through the fall of Adam, we were all made incompetent with the inability to meet the standard of God. As a result of that, we were damned to hell and to perdition. But God, in His love and His mercy, sent His Son Jesus to die, to bear the price of sin, that whosoever believes in Jesus can not only be saved, but redeemed back into position of rightness with God, to the extent that we are no longer just servants of God, but children of God, heaven-bound with a new citizenship in heaven. This is the gist of the gospel. But once you hear that, what else is there? Same old sermon. Go out into all the world and preach the gospel. Daniel, how many times do you have to say that? Bible says, go out and make disciples of people. When's the last time you all went out and made disciples of people? We want to go out and make managers of people, but not disciples. We want to go out and impress people and tell them about our church and our ministry, but we don't want to tell anybody about Jesus. We want to go out and impress people about the music ministry in our church, but we don't want to go out and impress anybody about Jesus. We want to go out and impress people with all the programs that a church puts together, but we don't want to tell anybody about Jesus. What the heck is wrong with us? Jesus isn't enough? We got to draw the hook. We got to toss something out there they can relate to. You know, they don't want to go to their grandmother's church. They won't go to a new contemporary church. Jesus isn't enough? You think Jesus had a problem holding teenagers' attention? Huh? I don't read anywhere where Jesus had to go make hand puppets out of palm leaves. Huh? But He said, bring the children to me. Suffer them to come to me. The children came to Jesus. Seems that the world has more impact or more influence on the church than the church on the world. And I'm trying to figure out why the church just doesn't resist. If the church doesn't want to be a part, all they have to do is say no. And yet the church doesn't do that. There's only one book. It's the same redundant message. Rather than become experts in the book, we want to become experts in Christian programs. What can be easier than go out into all the world and preach the gospel? What can be easier than making disciples of men? What can be easier than that? But what do? We make it complicated. Jesus says, go out into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And what does the church do? The church says, you got to go to Bible school and study evangelism. Right? 3 units. Huh? $150 a unit. Right? You're going to take evangelism courses in school so you can learn how to keep the Great Commission. Are we out of our minds? What are we doing? I've asked the question, why do Christians charge for Bible school if it says preach the gospel to every creature, making disciples of men? Making disciples of men doesn't mean charge them to teach them the Bible. Where the hell did that come from? I don't understand these people. For the life of me, I don't get it. We're going to have Bible school. What you going to learn? The Bible? How much does it cost? Oh, but brother, you're being too simplistic, Daniel. You don't understand. We have real estate prices. Why do you need real estate to teach the Bible? You don't understand. We need administrative staffing so that they can get a degree. It has to be accredited. Let me ask you this. What the hell does the government have to do with accrediting a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Huh? Why is the church more like the world? And why is the church acquiescing to these standards of the world that have nothing to do with Jesus, nor do they have any authority in Jesus to give you anything? Yet this is what the church has become. I'm just tossing this out. I don't get it. I'll tell you what, I bet you get paid more if you teach the Bible right. You hold Bible class and you tell people, we're going to go through and we're going to do like Bible school. We're going to teach you the things of God. We're going to teach you the book of Romans. It's going to take a year. But every time you come in, according to the Word of God, you better have some money to put in that bucket. I bet you make more money that way. Now, isn't that how it's supposed to work? You're supposed to put a value judgment on what you learn. Isn't that how it works? Share with those that teach you in the Word of God. Isn't that what Galatians teaches you? Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever man sows, that shall he reap. What's it talking about? Sharing with the teacher. I'll bet you money, you get more money that way than to charge somebody tuition. But see, nobody believes the Word of God. Everybody, we want to be like the school. We want to be like the accredited colleges. What accredited college can teach you to lay hands on the sick so that the Spirit of God can confirm it with signs following? What school can teach you that by charging you? On the contrary, it sounds like that guy that came to Paul and said, hey, you know that thing you do where you lay hands and the Holy Ghost comes on people and they speak in tongues? I'll give you money to give me this gift. Remember that? Book of Acts, remember that? Bar Jesus is his name. He says, teach me how to do that. I'll give you money. Because he realized, I can make some money this way. Now that's why I've always got a problem with the church, because everything Jesus says don't do, the church does. Why do we charge for Bible school? I don't care what excuse they give. We got a building, we got to pay rent. Why pay rent? You know how they used to teach in the days of Paul? You'd go find a street corner, and if you got the goods, you draw a crowd. I don't understand this. I just got a problem with it because this is the way the system works. This is the way the church gets swallowed up into the things of Babylon. And the church just fails to recognize or just refuses to acknowledge that the world's ways aren't God's ways. I just wonder about this stuff. I believe that God knew television was coming. But I don't think television erases the Great Commission. Go out into all the world and preach the gospel. What does that mean? That every one of us have a responsibility to share the gospel of Jesus with people. Just because there's television ministries, and I believe that God has ordained some to be on TV. Not all, some to be on TV. People seem to have the idea that because there's people preaching on TV, nobody needs to share the gospel with anybody anymore. I don't understand the church in these aspects. An evangelist is supposed to preach the gospel, not open up a Bible school. An apostle is supposed to establish churches for the purpose of setting the sound doctrine of God. Not so that he could run around with a title, calling himself the apostle everywhere he goes. Paul knew he was an apostle. He didn't have to tell people. People knew who he was. To the Corinthians, he says, I'm your father. I birthed you in the gospel. He knew who he was. They knew who he was. He didn't have to go around announcing himself that way. Bishop, elder, deacon, doctor. Huh? By the way, what degree did Jesus have? What kind of doctor was he? Huh? You know, there's a lot of jackasses out there who'd give him an honorary doctorate just to make themselves official. Huh? You know, that's why they do that. That's why they'll go get a preacher who's literally not educated to that extent through the world of academia. And what happens is, because he's established a ministry that's sizable and the works for God that he's performing are noticeable to the extent you can't deny it, they say, Dan, we're going to give you an honorary doctorate. We're going to recognize your achievements. And though you never read all the books we read, though you didn't go through the core curriculum we went through, it's obviously that you know some of this stuff, so we're going to recognize you by giving you this honorary doctorate. I'd like to see a preacher that's got some big ones just tell them what to do with that. But you know why they don't do it? Because they get to be the doctor. The doctor. Dr. Dan. Has a nice ring to it. You'll never wait at Marie Callender's again. Dr. Dan, table for two. Huh? Has a nice ring to it. Speaking at the next men's fellowship, Dr. Dan. Huh? Why does the academic world choose to recognize people like this? Because it makes them look bad. To have gone through school, to have all these letters following their name. There's a little alphabet soup after each name. Only to see somebody like Dan Zan or some other just run-of-the-mill preacher guy doing for God what they'll never do. And they want to just lump you in the same lump that they are so they can say, he's one of ours. I don't know any, but I'd sure love to know one that tells these guys where to roll that sheepskin, where to stuff it. You got something to say to our graduates? Yeah, everything you learned counted as dung. Anything else to say? Yeah, you wasted your money. But it's a Christian institution. Then they shouldn't have charged you. Somebody says, Brother Daniel, you don't understand. It's a business. Then why you go into a school that's a business? I just don't understand this. It's beyond me. But why has the church gone here? Tell me that it hasn't slept with this whore. Huh? I'm just using the analogy of Revelation. We'll have Bible school. All right. We've been talking about these assorted dogmas, these ideas of bilingual education, these ideas of multiculturalism. And I told you God is not multicultural. God isn't interested in multiculturalism. God isn't concerned with your multiculturalism. I'm not concerned with your multiculturalism. I'm not concerned what color your skin is. All I care about is when the trumpet of God sounds, if you show up. That's all I care about. That's all God cares about. You think it made a difference that Simon the Cyrene was black? Huh? The man that carried the cross of Jesus? You know, I watch these black preachers on television, and man, they act like they hit the lotto when they read that verse. Huh? You put them right up there with the guy who made the stop sign and old Dr. Drew that, you know, Help with the hemoglobin problems. Huh? Simon, a black man. Huh? I'm just telling, this is what I hear in church. Anybody else ever hear the sermon about Simon, the Cyrene, and they got to tell you, a black man. That's right. Black hands and woolly hair. I've heard those sermons. What the heck is this? Black History Month or church? You know, when it's Black History Month, you got to preach on Simon the Cyrene? Huh? What the heck is the church doing? Why are we even playing that game? That's proof that God is multicultural. All that is proof that God will use anybody. And if you're impressed with God using Simon the Cyrene, he used a donkey to talk to his prophet. He used a fish to swallow Jonah. He used a fish to give Peter tax money. He rode a donkey into Jerusalem. He's riding back on a horse. So if you're impressed with the folk he used, we're no different than anything else he used. God isn't multicultural. He isn't into multiculturalism. He's only into one culture, and that's the culture of Jesus. We're either part of the church and the culture of the church, or we're not. And what's sickening is that the culture of the church looks more like the culture of this world. That's why every morning, 11 o'clock, you got the Mexican church, you got the black church, you got the Korean church, you got the Chinese church, you got the white church. People talk about multiculturalism, but they don't believe it. That's why if you get a Korean guy in here, he don't want to be part of my church. If we ever get a Korean, he ain't going to have Korean church. Oh, God's called me to build people. Then bring them here and shut up. But you don't speak their language. Who cares? God does. Chinese guy, Brother Daniel, I like your teaching, but I want to start Chinese church. Shut up. Brother Daniel, you just don't relate to the black folk. We got to have black preachers to do that. You don't need anything. We're just playing games. This whole issue of sensitivity. Remember what sensitivity does. We talked about sensitivity last week. Sensitivity means nothing. Sensitivity is nothing more than another game of one-upmanship. Sensitivity means that if I have to be sensitive to somebody, it's obvious that I know something about your people, so that I have to bow and cater to you so not to offend you. So what does that make me? Better than you. We're going to have to be sensitive. Daniel, you got to be sensitive to the women. You know what it means to be sensitive to women? That women obviously are too weak to handle the truth. So, Brother Daniel, don't say that because you're not being sensitive. So, for me to say I'm practicing sensitivity, what am I really saying? I'm better than all of you. Sensitivity, what does sensitivity seek to do? We're going to even the playing field. We're going to make it all even so nobody feels offended. But the minute one becomes sensitive toward another group, you just messed up everything you tried to accomplish. Got to be sensitive toward those Hispanics. Got to be sensitive toward them. What does that mean? Nothing more than you're going to placate them. You're going to patronize them. You're going to tell them about how cool your gardener Juan is. Huh? How you once had a nanny named Maria, and oh, she was really nice. Huh? Or Consuelo. Sensitivity. God isn't into sensitivity. Jesus isn't into sensitivity. How sensitive was Jesus when the Syrophoenician woman came and said, hey, my daughter, she's homesick. And Jesus said, why should I give the children's bread to the dogs? Huh? How sensitive was he to the woman at the well? You're a Samaritan. What do you got to do with me? How sensitive was he racially and ethnically and even on the basis of nationality with her? He didn't care. I'm here before the lost sheep of Israel. I'm exclusive. How sensitive was that? I think Jesus would get called on the carpet nowadays. Huh? Being racially insensitive. Don't even get started on the Apostle Paul talking about women who left their natural course and decided they wanted to be with other ladies. Huh? I guess Jesus would be a classic homophobic. Huh? Men who turned over their natural desires and chased each other. And God said, go ahead, you can have them. I guess Jesus would be a homophobe, wouldn't he? He should have never said that. Paul should have never said those things. Brother Dan, you got to be sensitive to those gays. Be sensitive. What's wrong with these people? Jesus isn't into that stuff. All right. Talking about Babylon again. Let's not forget how we got into this. Hitler established that what he wanted to do was to establish a base. And again, when we talk about Germany and even Nazi Germany, Nazi is a word that everybody gets called, but what does Nazi really mean? It's literally National Socialist. And I get in trouble every time I say something like this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think you're intelligent enough to understand this. After the Treaty of Versailles, after World War I, the nations that surrounded Germany, especially the Allies who helped defeat Germany in that First World War, when it came time to sign the peace treaty and the Treaty of Versailles, and they really bent Germany over the barrel and said, you're going to pay reparations for this war. You're going to help restore these things. You're not going to be able to build a military machine. They literally just took the German people and just shafted them. And everywhere a German went, if you were a Pole, if you were Austrian, if you were Hungarian, and you walked by a German person, especially if you were Jewish or anything else, you'd walk by a German person and you'd look him in the eye and you'd spit on the floor and you'd let him know you knew how much of a dog he was. Now, how long can you treat somebody like that before they just start striking back? In fact, the politicians who understood what the Treaty of Versailles was about, they even prophesied and said, we will have a world war in about 20 years. And they were exactly right, almost to the date. Exactly 20 years after the Treaty of Versailles, World War II broke out. Now again, here you got Germany, defeated after war, not only occupied by foreign nations to the extent that everybody's going to keep their eye on them, make sure they behave. Now what happens if a foreign power suddenly comes onto your land and starts telling you what to do? Huh? Now look, I'm not telling you Hitler was a good guy. He's a piece of crap. Look, let me just say that first. That's my disclaimer. He's a piece of crap. He went overboard. Those people from the international banks who even helped finance him, they realized they made a mistake. I'm going to tell you right up front, he was a piece of crap. But listen to what he did. He recognized that a people separated from their land are nothing. Now let me ask you a question. What happened? Well, what was the first thing God said to Abraham as a wandering Hebrew? He said to him, I'm going to make kings out of you. Multiplicity of kings shall come from you. But what he said to him was, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that I'm given to you. One of the first promises he made to him was, I'm going to lead you into a land that I'm going to give you. So God intends to give his people land. When they came out under Moses, what did God do? He doled out land to his people. Moses didn't make it, but under Joshua, he doled out land. Now, what happened every time Israel got their butt kicked and got displaced from their land? They were nothing more than a wandering people that become assimilated with other nations, and then they get lost. So you cannot be a people on this earth that don't have a relationship with their land. Now, despite how horrible we think parts of Mexico are, you try to mess with those people's land, we got a war. I mean, listen, we got those Indian folk off their land here, threw them on reservations. And you can look at that desolate land that the government gave them, but tell me what would happen if you decided you wanted to go over there and take some land. You can't take people from their land and determine to run them or to control them. So Hitler, in essence, recognized that a people apart from a land were nothing. So he begins to establish himself as the Lord. I'm going to get you back your land. I'm going to fix things. We're going to kickstart the economy. We're going to socialize things. We're going to give everybody a shot. We're going to give everybody some. And while everybody else had a motherland, he wants to establish a fatherland. Now, apart from Hitler the nut, what's wrong with what he's doing? Huh? But whoever tells you this? Why don't you ever learn this? Does that sound like the actions of a twisted man? Now later on when he starts doing all that other stuff, man, obviously the guy is twisted. But this is what happens. This is what a National Socialist is. This is somebody who says, I'm going to dole out to everybody. We all going to get some. This is what happens when you get a people that don't understand what it is that has taken place historically. We get a people that basically get a distorted view of history. We don't understand the truth, and we don't understand what it is that has taken place. And as a result of that, it's very easy for us to be deceived and to accept the status quo, that which the system wants to give us, that which is fed to us. So we're learning about how these things operate, how these things work, but we're going to talk a little bit about this today because Hitler decided he was going to take the youth, educate them, train them. And in essence, we know what happened. He brainwashed them. You get kids to rat out their parents. You get kids who have different priorities, nationalistic priorities, rather than the priorities of their folk. This is how we detoured into this. Under assorted dogmas, the flow of racism. We already talked about sensitivity. We already talked about multiculturalism. Now we're talking about the flow of racism. One of the claims for multicultural programs in schools and colleges is that they reduce intergroup conflict by making all groups aware of and sensitive to racial, ethnic, and cultural differences, and more accepting these differences. So what the agenda in schools is rather than to teach the common culture that America has, the agenda now is to make all kids aware of all the different cultures, races, ethnicities. And by making people aware of these cultures, races, and ethnicities, it's going to cause kids to just turn around and say, oh, Jacob's from India. He don't eat pork. His daddy bathes in the Ganges. Oh, we understand now. Peace. Right? Is that what happens? Huh? What happens when you start telling people in school about the different ethnic, cultural ideas and views of somebody they're not used to being around? Huh? What happens? Man, they start making fun of them. Huh? Listen, everybody always says that racism, and this is part of the agenda. Remember we were talking about that Frankfurt School, and what is the main agenda of that Frankfurt School? Is to literally separate and break apart, first of all, the core of a family unit, and in breaking down the core of the family unit, what are you breaking down? You're breaking down Christianity, and when you break down Christianity, you take down with it what? America and everything it's built on. So in order to break the core of the family unit, you have to teach values elsewhere other than the house to kids. And for the longest time, we have been told that racism all is rooted out of the house. And that racism is all what happens in the house. Listen, my kid, tell you the truth, even my youngest, my youngest, Munchie, she realized that people had different skin color, but you know what? It don't bother her. She'll run around in a market, find a little black girl, and they'll start running around the market playing because, you know, we'll be shopping down the same aisle. And then she says, did you see my friend? Color was irrelevant. They can be white, they can be Italian, they can be speaking Greek. Kids don't care. So I don't have to sit there and tell my kid anything special except they're from another country. They're just like us. I don't have to go any further. Well, my daughter goes to school, and suddenly in school, what do they start telling them? All these other people who we brought over here as slaves. They whipped them. And you start getting this whole history thing. And I'm not telling you they shouldn't learn these things. I'm just telling you what happens as they get exposed to these cultures. How do kids behave when somebody has a different culture? Huh? They adhere to the teachings of Buddha and Confucius. Suddenly kids run around, hey, Confucius say, right? What do kids do when people are different? Huh? You got 5 skinny kids, and here comes a fat kid. What happens? Huh? You got 5 white kids, and here comes the black kid or the brown kid. What happens? I don't need to tell you. You think kids don't see the difference? Let's go on and read. One of the claims for multicultural programs in schools and colleges is that they reduce intergroup conflict by making groups aware of and sensitive to racial, ethnic, cultural differences. Now, what does that mean, to make them aware of and sensitive to racial, ethnic, and cultural differences? What does that mean? That means that we're going to teach people how different everybody is. Now, when you start teaching people how different, like, look, in this church, this is a great example. We got a white guy, we got a black guy, we got a brown guy, we got women, got some French. So we got different folk in here. Do we agree? Now let me ask you this. Are we all Americans? And above being Americans, are we all Christians? So, is that one of the major reasons why we can all stand here and get along? Now what happens if suddenly we start saying, well, Danzan's a white guy. He's in his late 30s, so he likes Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin. He likes big cars with big wheels. Likes white women. Now what am I doing? I'm just making you aware of the difference in a cultural, ethnic, and racial person, aren't I? This is Whitney. He likes the Whispers, Aretha Franklin, and R&B music. He likes black women. He talks Ebonics. So don't call him ignorant. That's the way they communicate in the inner city. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Right? And then we come over here and say, that's Bobby from El Paso, Texas. You can't get any more Mexican than that. He eats beans and tortillas. Drives a pickup truck with a dent that ain't fixed. He likes country western music. Now what am I doing? Well, I just picked a white guy, a black guy, and a brown guy. There's Lucy. She likes love songs. She's very sensitive. She's single. What am I doing? I'm making you aware of ethnic, racial, and cultural differences so you can get along. So you can get along. Now tell me, the more we harp on these differences, tell me what you're going to find out about each other. You're going to find out, Whitney likes that stuff? I hate that stuff. All of a sudden you bring something up, and Danzan says, yeah, that's how it happened. Whitney says, oh no, that ain't according to black history. And then Bobby says, oh no, that ain't the way it happened. That ain't how General Santa Anna gave it up. And then Lucy stands up and says, well, I'm a woman. I think if women were running the world, it would never happen that way. That it ain't easier to say, we don't like him. He eats lasagna and tuna salad. We don't like his food. White bread, spaghetti, we can get into that. Now, what business does any school have teaching this stuff to your kids? Those are Iranians. They lock their women in the house. They're patriarchal and evil. They kill goats in the front yard. They're very religious. They held our hostages, our embassy, back in the early 70s, or the late 70s. Tell me that somebody teaching your kids this is going to make them get along. Now, what's the common culture here? We're all in Christ. We're Americans. We're part of Manasseh. Doesn't matter what color you are. Doesn't matter what nationality you're from. Doesn't matter. See, and this is the problem. As long as people with color on our skin, as long as we keep wanting to break from the culture and establish our own. I'm Mexican American, I'm African American, I'm Chinese American, I'm everything else American. What are we really doing? And then you got teachers telling people, now there, Tyrone, you are African American. And Jose, you are Mexican American. What are they doing? Now tell me that if you're in a class full of white kids and suddenly the teacher says, Jose, you should be proud of your people. You're a Mexican American. Tell me what that just did in that classroom. Made him separate. Huh? What do you think's going to happen at recess or lunch? Everybody's going to invite him out for tacos, right? So let me ask you this. If the school took on the role to teach kids how to be sensitive to racial, ethnic, and cultural differences, what are they really doing? What are they breeding? Huh? Racists. They're breeding racists. And when you're sensitive to multiculturalism, when I say, well, we can't say that in front of Whitney. You ever notice how if you get an ethnic crowd and somebody says, that's what you people think, what happens? I may as well be wearing a Klan hat, right? Bunch of Mexicans come in and say, why do you guys always? What do you mean, you guys? What does this do? Now, again, what are we talking? We're talking about a system. We're talking about how this system, how the philosophy has come into the church. What's the church always seeking to do? We're going to be multicultural. I remember watching Dr. Price. This is Cultural Week. Everybody's going to dress up in their cultural outfits. What for? It's only one culture that matters, the culture of Christianity. The culture of America. That's it. Why you need to have ethnic day except to separate? I'll tell you what, if I showed up in a sirop and a sombrero in Dr. Price's church, I'd be the oddball. Huh? All right. Whatever the plausibility of these claims, they're seldom, if ever, backed by any evidence that schools or colleges with such programs have less intergroup conflict than institutions without them. The real dogmatism of such claims comes out most clearly, however, when mounting evidence of increasing animosities among students from different backgrounds in the wake of multicultural programs is met by further claims that this only shows the racism of the larger society overflowing into the schools and colleges. Where's the racism coming? Is it coming from the outside into the schools? Let me ask you a question. When suddenly somebody says, we're going to have affirmative action, and we're going to take so many Hispanics, we're going to take so many blacks, and isn't it funny that affirmative action only deals with blacks, Hispanics, but Chinese don't count? Listen, I'm telling you the truth. Do you know when it comes to affirmative action, Chinese don't count as a minority? You know why Chinese don't count as a minority? Because they get accepted into school anyway, and they do better than white people. So somebody said, that minority don't count. Well, how does this work? That browns and blacks count, but Chinese don't? Somebody tell me how that's fair. So, in an attempt to make things even, what are they really doing? Huh? Now, when all of a sudden, look at, again, put on your white caps and pretend you're white. What happens when you score 97 and Hispanics and blacks score in their 80s and they get admitted and you don't? What does that create? When suddenly the white people say, if it wasn't for them, my kid would be in college right now. So where do these attitudes and where do these, I guess, feelings of race bias really come from? Where are they being created? And who's creating them? Huh? And what's the church doing? What's the church? The church is doing the same thing. Same thing. Church is right in there. An editor of the American... Somebody said, I don't like that book. Let me show you the picture of the fellow who wrote it. He's a Tom. His name is Thomas. An editor of the American School Board Journal was all too typical in asserting without a speck of evidence that the effects of society's racism are spilling over into the schools. But where's it coming from? It's coming from in the schools. Public schools are society's best hope of battling racism. Public schools? So public schools are America's best hope in battling racism. He urged adding multicultural programs to the school curriculum and quoted an education professor who said, few other instructional techniques promise to make such improvements. So they're going to save the schools by promoting multiculturalism. And what happens when you teach multiculturalism? You cause more separation. What if you got a school full of Hispanics and here comes the Italian? And you open your lunch buckets and everybody's got a burrito. And the Italian got Tupperware full of spaghetti. And the teacher decides she's going to help remedy the problem and say, look at here. Let me tell you about Italians. What's that teacher going to tell your kid about Italians? What if somebody says, ain't they the ones Mussolini led? Fascists? The dogmatism by multicultural zealots is found in the elementary schools to the colleges and universities. It stretches across the country and internationally as well. The chairman of the Committee of Inquiry into Race-Related Murder on School Playgrounds in Manchester, England, reported, at several stages of our inquiry, we were told that racism in school derives from racism in the wider community. Yet after reviewing the zealous multicultural anti-racist policy of the schools, policies which the committee chairman generally favored, he was forced to conclude that in that instance, at least, the actual implementation of these policies was one of the greatest recipes for the spread of racism from the school into the community. The very possibility that racism is flowing in the opposite direction to that assumed was never considered in most of the vast international literature on multiculturalism. So the more you deal with multiculturalism, the more you deal with differences, what does it do to people? It separates and divides. It's a shame that in this country you could make money picking out the idiosyncrasies and differences in people, isn't it? The Manchester Multicultural Program was instituted despite warnings that such programs in the London area had proved to be a fiasco and divisive and had created suspicion and squabbles. Ordinary people in the neighborhood near the Manchester school where a Pakistani boy was killed by a white boy also had no difficulty in considering the possibility that multiculturalism could be counterproductive. I feel that this enforced focus on multiculturalism produces prejudice, one said. I'm going to stop there. We'll come back. I'm going to read a little more Pat Buchanan. All right, we're talking about these ideas. Orwell said, words are weapons. Traditionalists have yet to discover the effective countermeasures by calling the enemy a racist and a fascist. You don't have to answer his arguments. He must defend his character. In a court of law, the accused is innocent until proven guilty. But in the charge of racism, homophobia, and sexism, there is a presumption of guilt. So if somebody calls you a name like that, somebody's got to prove you ain't. See, this is why it's going to take people with color on their skin to fix this. Because according to their own rationalization, you can't be a racist. Right? If a white man uses the N-word, what is he? He's a racist. But if a black guy says cracker, what's he? A victim. If he wasn't oppressed, he wouldn't have said that. If a Mexican guy says, I'm oppressed by the man, the honky. Huh? Gringo. Who's going to call me a racist? Huh? They're going to say, see what hundreds of years of oppression have done? Now, am I a racist or a victim? If somebody says, well, Daniel only said that because that's the sum total of hundreds of years of oppression against brown people. Isn't that how they justify that? Now, let me ask you a question. If a white guy, see, look, under that logic, I want to be a racist. You know why? Listen to the language. Charles, you can't be a racist. Because your people are neither in power nor will they ever have power. So you can't be a racist. So even though you call Whitey a racist, what are you still saying about him? That he'll always be in power. He'll always be better than us. Daniel, you're brown. You can never be a racist. Why? Because your people ain't in power and they probably never will be. There may be a lot of you, but they ain't going to be in power. So I can't be a racist. What's that telling me about my people? We ain't good enough to be racist? Huh? Well, I guess you're black people, you can never be good enough to be a racist. Damn it. You can never be like Whitey. Americans today that accept these ideas cannot know that they were hatched in a Marxist nursery in Weimar, Germany, or thought out in a fascist prison in Mussolini's Italy. Now, listen, why do these guys come up with these ideas and these philosophies are able to conquer the Western world, and Christianity, that is the bedrock religion and philosophy of the West, can't even get a foothold? Huh? All right. Or that their listen, Americans who do accept the ideas cannot know that they were hatched in a Marxist nursery in Weimar, Germany, or thought out in a fascist prison in Mussolini's Italy, or that their purpose was to subvert our culture and overturn our civilization. So the rationale behind this was to overturn us. But that begs the question, why did the America of the 60s, if still a country immersed in Judeo-Christian heritage, history, traditions, and beliefs, why did they become so receptive to these revolutionary ideas? True, a small slice of America's elite before and during the Great Depression became complicit in what French author Julien Benda called the treason of the intellectuals. They despised the Christian capitalist America in which they lived. Now, why do people hate Christian America, and why do they always equate Christianity and capitalism together? Now, in essence, what happens is what we're really fighting is the idea or the notion of the haves and the have-nots. All right? But you've got a lot of people that grow up despising this country that gives them the very rights and privileges that it gives them. Let's go on and read a couple things. It says, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a more famous radical than any other Frankfurt school, and she anticipated their ideas. This is what she said. Birth control appeals to the advanced radical because it is calculated to undermine the authority of the Christian churches. I look forward to seeing humanity someday free of the tyranny of Christianity, no less than capitalism. Now, this is Margaret Sanger. This is the lady who headed up Planned Parenthood. What is her agenda? Is her agenda birth control and abortion? What's her agenda? To overturn Christianity and capitalism. So, listen, she said this. This is her quote. Why do we think she is some great hero for women? Huh? Why is she some great, point man for women's movements if her goal is to overturn the church and capitalism? So what's her goal? Now let me ask you a question. There's no doubt abortion is still argued, but it's still legal. These agendas not only have carried through, but they literally have had an impact on our society to the extent that it's legal. What's Christianity done? Huh? Why did they succeed? Four elements come together in the 60s to create the critical mass that exploded like Dr. Oppenheimer's device in the New Mexico desert at Alamogordo, talking about the A-bomb, the hydrogen bomb. First was what they refer to as the message in the bottle, as the men of the Frankfurt School called their ideas. They basically said, we're going to toss this message in the bottle. We're going to toss out these ideas and let it float around, and as people open it, it begins to germinate. So the Frankfurt School said, first was, we're going to toss out this message in the bottle. This is what they called their ideas. And as their ideas were germinating, other Americans alienated from the Christian and capitalist culture were working independently on similar strategies and ideas to undermine the culture and abolish the old America they had come to detest. Nurtured for decades, these ideas began to flower in the 1960s. Now, y'all remember the 60s? I was a kid. I remember the 60s. I remember people they called hippies. barefoot, dirty, smoking dope. All they cared about was, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Huh? Jimi Hendrix. And then he dies of an OD. Huh? Everyone remembers these guys. Now that we're older, how many think they're role models? But weren't they the icons of a generation? Huh? The Beatles? Weren't they the icons of a generation? Now what they represent? 1960s. Now you need to remember that date because we may be touching on other aspects, but there are many excuses made for different people, especially different ethnic groups. If you study your ethnic group, and I say your ethnic group because we're all different. Hispanics, prior to the 60s, had a higher quality of life. And when I say quality of life, I'm talking about higher quality of family life. They stayed married. Blacks literally stayed married more than whites. Had a nuclear family that outlasted whites. But as soon as the 60s came in, what happened to the black family? What happened to the Hispanic family? What happened to the white family? It wasn't even a decline, it was an explosion. Now, it started in the 60s, but how many times have you heard something like, well, the Hispanics are like they are because the gringo took his land. And the blacks are going through this because these are the scars of slavery. How come the scars of slavery didn't affect the black family until the 60s then? Huh? They can't keep a family because the slave master used to take the father and ship him out and sell him and keep the mother and then sell the kids. So blacks have no concept of family. Wait a minute. How many generations are removed? Now, how many ever heard that theory? That this is why black dads leave? And we all heard those theories. How come the scars of slavery only hit people after the 60s? Huh? Must have skipped several generations, huh? Either that or they just didn't know their history. They didn't have a scapegoat to blame. Hispanic, same thing. Now, as a kid growing up in the 60s, you didn't get the girls knocked up. Huh? You didn't go out there, ring the bell without taking the prize. Huh? Just didn't happen. And you were afraid to because, there was a dad in that house. Suddenly, it's all changed. Why does it? Now, I'm telling you, there's a correlation here. In the 60s. Now, we'll come back to that other stuff. Second, there arrived on campus beginning in 1964 a huge cohort of youth that had known neither hardship or war. So a couple things lead to our country going into this decline. One is there's no hardship in war. Second is that there is this message in a bottle floating around now. Spoiled, affluent, and carefree, confident, liberated, and bored, these young people were ready for rebellion. Conservative scholar Robert Nisbet reminds us boredom is one of the most insistent and universal of the forces that shape human behavior. High among them are sex, narcotics, revolution. 1960s Arnold Toynbee called an internal proletariat of students bored with their studies, encountered graduate instructors bored with their subjects, and unexciting lives a combustible mixture. So you got bored kids and bored professors. What's that going to give you? All right, third, 1960s television could convey the tactics and triumphs of campus radicals and urban revolutionaries instantly to their peers, and the medium now matured, no longer the 50s fiefdom of Howdy Doody and Matt Dillon, could not only transmit the new ideas, but can reinforce them by creating the visual realities. So you got a message in a bottle. You got kids who don't know hardship, had no wars, bored, mixed with professors that are bored with their topics and subjects. Third, you got TV. Now, if you remember TV in the 60s, it's true. When I was a kid growing up, man, it was Star Trek. It was Matt Dillon. Man, it was combat. And all of a sudden, I'm turning 9 and 10, and I'm watching go-go dancers on KHJ-TV. Huh? Wow! Everybody's groovy, right? Teresa remembers. Girls dancing in cages. Television. Conveying the long hair. The fourth indispensable element was Vietnam. If the war meant sacrifice, bloodshed, perhaps death, the Woodstock generation wanted no part of it. What Marcuse offered was intellectual cover for cowardice, a moral argument for malingering, a way to dodge the draft while feeling superior to those who went. Now listen, I was a kid, but I was trying to figure out why the long-haired, stinky guys who wouldn't wave a flag were considered heroes and icons to a society that saw some of our best young men go out and fight. And these were the crew-cut kids. These were probably the best of America. And who were we holding up as icons? Huh? I'm just asking. How'd this thing flip around? And how did that generation of the 60s fall into this? Well, Pat Buchanan cites four things in his opinion that helped cause this. One, this malingering message in a bottle, this gospel. Literally, it's a gospel. Second, students that know no hardship nor war, mixed with professors who are bored, got nothing else to do, time of peace and prosperity. Third, television. Fourth, an incident or a specific historic happening that people want to rebel against. Now what do you get? Well, got Vietnam protests, got Hanoi Jane, got protests and marching, got racial rioting, got America seemingly falling apart at the seams, assassinations. What's happening to society? Now, I don't need to tell you this. I'm not teaching history. I'm just telling you that these are all things that are laid out. These are all happenings that are occurring that are causing change in our country. And where's the church? Huh? Where's the church? They're running the treadmill while these Marcusian, while these humanistic agendas continue to spread. And while this is happening, what's the church doing? I'll tell you what, during the 1960s, Oral Roberts was preaching. During the 60s, we saw even Catherine Kuhlman. Saw some great revivals, but as a whole on society, what changed? What changed? Now see, all I'm trying to get at, we're still unveiling what Babylon is and where Babylon is going. If we don't understand history, DeSantiana says we're liable to repeat it. And just like those Maccabees who would build the wall only to get it knocked down. Listen, I'm telling you, didn't they figure out somebody was going to try to knock it down? They'd build it, get knocked down. They'd build it, get knocked down. They'd build it, get knocked down. And the whole of their existence, their whole life was building this wall that was going to get knocked down. We as Christians need to come to a realization that there is a group of people, that there is an agenda, not only to knock down the walls of our church, but to knock down the walls of Christianity, thus knock down the walls of America by knocking down the walls of your family. And the best way to knock down the walls of your family is to make you hate everybody by these multiculturalist ideas, by these agendas of tolerance, these agendas of sensitivity, even these agendas of racism, disguised as anti-racism.